Hello and welcome to This is 65. My name is Erin and I own Black Point Insurance. At Black Point, we help Medicare beneficiaries nationwide learn about the A, B, C's, and D's of Medicare. Along the way, we meet some amazing individuals, people who are in their encore careers, people who are volunteering. We meet advocates and we meet people who are authors, documentary stars, and the like, all across the board. And I am so excited to bring their stories in this format. This is 65 and bring them onto the show. Today's guest is a true inspiration. He's a long-term survivor of AIDS and spends his time advocating and volunteering with senior and disability action groups in San Francisco, bringing education and helping people by mentoring them and being truly an inspiration out there. He's a pioneering member of the 1970s Castro neighborhood of the original LGBTQ group. So you might make sure I say that right. He's actually participated in 2 documentaries. We'll feature those here today. And he is just an amazing survivor, advocate, and educator. I am thrilled to bring from backstage Harry Breaux. Welcome, Harry.
Welcome, Erin. Thank you.
Thank you so much for agreeing to join, and just tell us about the work that you're doing and how you have been able to be a survivor and your story. I just can't wait to get into it and learn more about you. So tell me your background. What's the story?
Well, I'll start off with a thank you to you for getting me into a good insurance program. So that's working
You're
fine.
welcome. Good.
That is so important when you survive so long. Background about the AIDS part, the long-term survivors, that I've been HIV positive according to the CDC blood samples that were taken from a hepatitis study in the late 70s. So the 79 sample was negative and the 81 sample was positive. So I kind of can say, yes, definitely I converted or seroconverted to HIV positive in 1980. I was a long-term survivor at that time, what actually they called a long-term progressor. And for some reason, it didn't kill me in 2 years like it did so many of my friends and so many other the men and women that it affected in those years. And I survived for 15 years and then pretty well collapsed with 3 diseases in 1996 when I was given a 50-50 chance to live and spent 3 weeks in the hospital. Fortunately for me, the cocktail, the famous cocktail that saved those that did survive, came out basically just the summer before. So I was sick in December of 96 and the cocktail came out in the summer of 96. So it was able to save me, and it brought me back
be here to tell this
from the
story.
edge of death.
Goodness. Yeah.
So that's kind of the story of the AIDS survivor part that's going on.
So what did you encounter, Harry? I mean, so you obviously you went 15 years plus, HIV positive, again, long-term survivor, in terms of being through this, but then you have this traumatic event, you're hospitalized, it could have killed you, right? And what was your experience like in the hospital? What did you notice in terms of being there, discrimination maybe in the healthcare system? What was it like?
Well, fortunately, I was in a part of the country where discrimination did not enter the picture for me. 8 o'clock one night, I was staying with some friends down near San Jose, and I couldn't get out of bed anymore. My temperature was like 105, and a friend of mine was there because I had always, I'd lost so many friends in going through the 80s, and it was a pretty traumatic part of that. So I said, I don't want to survive it. Like when it takes me out, let it take me out. And so she basically came in the room and said, like, I think it's taking you out. And you have high temperature, you can't get out of bed. She said, if you want to lay here and go ahead and die, I'll set everything up and, we'll take care of you until that happens. But she said, now is the time when you really need to make that decision. And just something very deep inside came up and said, oh, you got to try.
Right. It's kind of like you're being called towards this work that you do now. I mean, as relative as can be, I mean, it's a traumatic experience that you've been through, and you've had a decent care experience based on living in the San Francisco Bay Area. What have you learned across the country in terms of different levels of care people have received and what they're experiencing in similar situations to yourself?
Well, it's not a pretty picture that I've learned, is what it is. Each year I attend a group called Positive Living down in Fort Walton Beach, Florida, which is the longest running HIV program gathering in the southern part of the country. It's run by a good friend named Butch McKay. He created, and it's now in its 27th year this time. And I go there coming from an area where we're all very kind of hip about AIDS, and we know about it and we've lived through it, and San Francisco is very progressive and aware. But I go and I listen to stories, predominantly a lot of by African American women and transgender people that are in the South and having such a difficult time accessing medical care of any kind, much less stuff that's significant to them.
Wow.
So they're amazing warriors fighting and advocating to try and get the kind of help that they need. But all too often there aren't clinics available, there aren't access to drugs available, the medications that are required to keep the virus at bay. And the attitude is obviously that the governments in those areas don't seem to be as proactive as they would need to be to really control and deal with what's going on down there. So for me personally, I've not had the discrimination, but I've been in San Francisco, and to go out into those areas and hear the stories that I hear about how difficult it is shows that stigma and prejudice and bigotry is still very alive in our country.
Yes, for sure. You know, take me back for a minute because you know, I can remember I was just growing up when we started hearing about HIV and AIDS, and was kind of distant from me at the time, kind of growing up, but you were just at the forefront of, you know, 1970s and early 80s San Francisco. You saw friends get sick and pass away. You had a whole life associated with all that has happened. And can you take us back a little bit and just describe what it was like? How did you cope with losing so many friends and loved ones? Like what was it like in those early 80s?
Yeah, Erin. Well, I always like to preface this part of the discussion a little bit about the 70s, when there was a lot of activism in the 50s and 60s trying to break through the barriers about homosexuality and prejudice and bigotry of that, and discrimination, stigma, all that. Somehow, some way, the timing was right in around 1970 after Stonewall happened, prior to that, the Compton's cafeteria riots in San Francisco. Gay people finally kind of got their power enough to say, like, no more, we're not going to take it anymore. We're going to come out. There's a famous bar in San Francisco in the Castro area called Twin Peaks, which is, as far as we know, the first gay bar where you could actually see the people inside and they could see out. Because up until then, we had to hide, because if you were ever seen going in or out of a gay bar, you could get fired, you could get thrown out of your apartment. It was a rough life.
The 70s were
so
really
I was young, in my
transformational.
20s.
Yeah.
And came through the 70s with our breakthrough time. It was, you know, we had elected a gay supervisor here in the city, Harvey Milk, and it was all about this freedom and breaking through and changing society and social norms about it. And then it was eclipsed by the arrival of this virus that was lethal and cruel, basically. It was cruel to see what it did to people, to see them basically shrivel up within months or weeks, and to go from vibrant, you know, party goers and people at jobs, working their jobs and living their lives and creating joy and wonder in the world around them. A lot of creative forces.
Devastating.
they started just dropping away like they had breathed bad air and it was, killing them. And to walk down the street, and it went on for 15 years before that it was halted to some degree. It's still a very real thing. I want to point that out. It's
Right.
still a very, and
So much
with
has
the
come
drugs,
along with
there's a lot,
technology for treating people and keeping them
yeah,
healthier.
yeah,
It's amazing.
surviving now, but only because they're taking the drugs. Without the drugs, the virus still will do the AIDS thing. So the 80s were basically, going to work, coming home, taking care of roommates or friends, um, going to memorials, and then, going out to some dance venue to still, life still went on while this was
Right.
going on.
Wow.
But
What a
it was
transformational time, just
always
between
kind
the highs and the lows, and how devastating to have to experience it. I can't even imagine. Do you think that this is what moved you towards advocacy? I mean, what were your drivers in being, I mean, essentially an educator and advocate? What brought you down that path?
well, I think that's just who I came to Earth to be, let's say. Um, I've always kind of stood up for the underdog and felt that, I still feel, always probably will feel, humans can do better. We don't need to be discriminating against each other. We don't need to have hunger. There's more than enough food on this planet. There's more than enough opportunity on this planet. But I think because of looking at life in I hate to say selfish, but I guess that's the word for it, in a selfish way, um, to make sure that you take care of yourself, but there's enough to reach out to others. And some people have that drive and some people don't. And that's just the way humans are, I feel. And
Right.
I was one of those that always wanted to do that. I never really understood the prejudices, even though I grew up in the South in Louisiana, actually. And, it's kind of trained to see life as two, two races,
Right.
because that's how I grew up. But it never sat well with me. And once I kind of got into college and started becoming more awake, it was during the folk song days and, the song We Shall Overcome. I listened to that by Joan Baez for the first time in 1964. And I went like, something's going on here that I don't know about because I was there in my button down collar being a college sophomore, at the
Uh-huh.
time.
When did you
I'm
head
like,
out to
what is
San
she
Francisco?
talking about?
How old were you when you
But
headed out?
oddly enough, I'd gone to a concert that was the Kingston Trio back in like '63, probably.
Uh-huh.
So there was this awakening coming in songs, singing about things that I didn't know about and didn't really quite understand and didn't grasp. I just thought they were cute, pretty songs. And
Right.
then I started finding out more about
Connecting
that.
and
And
figuring the vision of the
so
words
I
and so.
basically, after
Yeah.
college, I basically kind of became a hippie and moved out to a commune in Oregon, which is where I made my contacts with San Francisco.
Got it. Got it. I was wondering how your story brought you here. So you headed to Oregon and then finally landed in the city. So, tell me,
It was the psychedelic period, so consciousness was raising. I mean, there was the Eastern philosophy was coming over stronger and stronger, and, seminars and consciousness raising activities and stuff. So it was a time for great exploration, I feel, of
right.
mental things.
Sounds amazing. I mean, if you were to kind of look over the course of the last 30, 40 years, just the evolution of HIV and AIDS and how things have changed for better or for worse, what story would you tell about, advancements, treatment, the prejudices? I mean, if you were to look at the whole big picture, how do you think that's evolved over the years?
Well, I'm glad to see that we have found not a cure, but at least a way to stop it from its devastation. We saw a repeat of that in COVID years. And often the question comes up is like, how do those two things compare? Well, with COVID, there wasn't, I feel, the stigma That didn't show up for COVID. It's like, oh, how sad you got COVID. Whereas with AIDS, it was like, oh, you're dirty, you're this,
It's like a
you're that.
punishment almost. Yeah.
Well, it was actually spoken of that way by some of the evangelical leaders, that we were being punished for our things. When, if you read the Bible, I'm sure that makes some sense to you. But if you read science, it totally does not make sense.
Right.
There are variations throughout nature in all kinds of ways and all types. Currently, the binary only men, only women kind of thing, science does not support that. We talk about the XX and the XY chromosomes. Well, there's XXXs and there's XXYs, and there's all these variations that science can show through biology.
Right.
So it's not quite the black and white that we seem to be stuck in because of past beliefs.
Right. Well, I know in the 1970s, you're one of the first out gays, right? You helped to start the LGBTQ organization, the first in the 70s. What was life like for you, just personally at that time?
Yeah, well, Erin, to call it an organization is kind of stretching it. There wasn't actually an organization. It was just a group of us that said we wouldn't take it anymore, and we wouldn't. We come out of the closet. I mean, that's the typical one, and we would, tell people, yes, we're gay. I'm gay. I remember sitting at restaurants with friends and stuff like that, and they'd go like, oh, well, are you married? I go like, no, I'm gay. And you can just see the
People be
jaws
just
drop.
shocked, because they
Feels
wasn't
spinning,
mainstream at the time. Yeah.
they can't believe that somebody would actually admit it. I mean, it was something that was supposed to be hidden and closeted and kept quiet. And, yeah, I had a cousin that was older than me by about 14 years, and I know his entire life was about, I mean, he was kind of obvious. He was an artist, and he wore ascot and stuff. There was a style even in the 50s. I mean, even in Oscar Wilde's day, there was, a green carnation or something to let people know you were gay. So the word always got out, but it wasn't in a public manner. And we
Right.
brought it out of that closet and
That's
out of the
amazing.
hiding place.
Such
And, we had to dodge beer bottles being thrown at us by punks and cars and stuff. But just it's a simple little thing, but like a woman and a man walking down the street holding hands, nobody says a thing. A woman and a man kissing on a street corner, nobody thinks twice about it. But just two men walking down the street hand in hand in the Castro was an act of defiance in the 70s. It took a
God.
lot of courage for us to do
Right.
that. We were aware of it. We had our own homophobia issues because remember, we were little boys that were brought up to believe that homosexuals were bad.
Right.
So we would believe it came down to who I am is what I'm supposed to be afraid of and push
I can't even
away.
imagine the inner conflict and what that was like and being at the forefront. That's incredible that you guys were able to be so strong and bring it forth.
That's what
So
the 70s
amazing.
were for me
Yeah.
anyway. Everybody had their own experience, but for me and in the Castro, that's what it was. It was like, no, we're here. We're not going away. We're going to live our lives as best we can, and we're going to deal with our own ideas of who we are, rather than having society tell us who we are,
Thank
because
you
it never
so
told
much.
positive.
Yeah. Thank you for doing that. So tell me a little bit about some of the work you've done. I know you've been part of a couple of documentaries. One you were sharing with me is Last Men Standing. I know we can find that searching online under Last Men Standing with your name, San Francisco Chronicle. It's a documentary produced by them. Tell us a little bit about Last Men Standing, how it was formed, what it's about. Tell your story of this.
Yeah, newspapers, as we know, because of media and websites, newspapers are kind of have lost popularity, or they were going through difficulties, whatever version of it you want. And one of the things they came up with is like, well, maybe we should make documentaries that we feature in our newspapers. So one of the health writers there, Erin and Harry, decided to take that kind of program on. And she wrote an article about long-term survivors. She talked to a couple of them and she went like, wow, this is a great idea, like to write an article about that, because there's lots of, overweight or whatever. There's a lot of topics in the health field to do it. But she chose that one. And so she wrote an article, and the people at the paper were reading the article and said like, well, we can take this further. Let's make a documentary. So she teamed up with two documentary producers, Erin Breaux and Tim Huson, and they put together this. And I was on a committee and sitting in a room, and she was in there telling about the idea. And she said, I want to get the names of some long-term survivors to interview for this documentary. And I happened to be sitting next to her, so I wrote my name and number and just slid it over to her. I said, you got one right here, honey. So she called, and they interviewed about 50 people. Yeah, they interviewed about 50 people, and she picked 7, and I was one of them, and I was so glad to. So they followed us around through 2014, I guess. And I think the documentary came out in 2015, maybe 2016. And they followed us around individually. We never kind of got together until the film was finished, so that we didn't connect, and we didn't know each other at the time.
And so forth.
So then the documentary came out.
Yeah, I easily found it online. Everybody out there listening, it's called Last Men Standing, Harry Breaux. It is 2016. It's in the archives of San Francisco Chronicle. You can pull that up. I really recommend a listen. So thanks for sharing that with us, Harry. And that's not it. Your story didn't stop there. There's something called 5B. Tell us a little bit about 5B.
Well, when AIDS first started in the early 80s, the treatment that the AIDS patient was getting in hospitals was horrendous, to say the least. And I mean, people would not deliver the food into the room. They'd leave it outside, and the person is in there dying, and they expect that person to come and get their food. It was just horrible, because they didn't know how it was transmitted. They didn't even know it was a virus at that time. So there was a lot of fear. And in San Francisco General, an amazing hospital here in the city, they decided that rather than kind of have these people isolated out in little isolation spots, they would create a ward for them, so that they would all be in one place and could do it. And they needed to they needed to have a staff of that was not going to treat these people like a pariah, but would give them some care that they needed. And there was an incredible small group of nurses led by Cliff Morrison and Allison Moed that volunteered for this, and Mary McGee. There were other ones, Guy Vandenberg. It was a whole group, and in the film they outline all these. So while they were filming that film about the nurses, there was a lot of films that covered the patients and how awful it was for the patients, but there was none about the nurses and how courageous and amazingly powerful they created this ward to take care of these people and us people. And so one of the people that came into it was a woman named Rita Rocket, who would volunteer to have like a buffet. She would bring food in. I think it was one Sunday a month. And she would come in and dressed up in a little costume and do some tap dance and bring some people to entertain, to just kind of present a little entertainment there in that ward. And the patients, as best they could, would come out to watch this all the time. So when they were doing the documentary, they were interviewing, and I was walking with a friend of mine in the Castro that night, George Kelly, and I saw her and I knew who she was, and they were interviewing on the corner, just the director, a microphone, and a camera. So it wasn't a big movie thing.
Right.
And I said, hold back, George, let's wait till they take a break. And they took a break, and I said, Rita, what are you doing here? And all that. I knew she had moved out of state. So we were chatting about it, and about Ward 5B and all the work she had done there. And the director said, you guys knew about 5B? Y'all were here then? Because it's kind of not usual. It's kind of unusual to find people that were around in the
Right.
early 80s. So we said, yeah, we were there. So he said, would you be willing to be interviewed? So they brought us over to Berkeley into a house they were using for a studio, and we sat on a couch and they asked questions. So we got our little Bert and Ernie gig going
Your
as comment
your
about
star keeps shining, right? You're bringing more and more gifts out there. So how cool to be a part of that. Where do people find 5B?
5D is a commercial one, unlike the Chronicle one. It is a commercial one, so you can just Google 5D documentary about the nurses that created the first AIDS ward, and it's at Amazon Prime, and it's also some other streaming places. Unfortunately, unlike Last Man Standing, it's free. You can find that for free, but 5D would have to rent it or buy it or something like that.
Spring,
And
spring.
although it is provided, there are services that provide it for nursing. So if like you're a nurse and want to have it for your nursing class or school project or something, there are organizations that you can go through to get that
Yeah.
for
Well, I just
free.
want to recommend to everybody out there, be sure to watch Harry and Friends, let's say, on 5B. You can view that on Amazon Prime or search in wherever you like to get your streaming services from. And Last Man Standing is actually easy to find. You can type that in, Last Man Standing, or type in Harry Breaux. It's 2016 San Francisco Chronicle Archives. You can find that there as well at no charge. So I definitely encourage everybody to take a listen or a watch and check that out. So what's your message, Harry? What message would you want to get out there to everybody about HIV and AIDS when you're looking at today's landscape, the 2020s, so to speak? We're the roaring 20s again. What's the message to get out there?
Well, if you're sexually active, period, straight, gay, whatever, um, take PrEP. You know, take the drugs that can prevent you from being infected. If you do find you're infected, then get on the medications as soon as you can and be stringent about following the protocols for them. There is no reason to feel you're going to die from it, as we lived through 15 years of that. But there is reason to believe that it is still a very potent virus, and HIV needs to be addressed wherever it's found. George Bush, when he was president in the early 2000s, created a lot of programs to address it around the world. Some of those are being challenged today, so I hope that changes. Yeah, and research counts, you know, scientific research counts, especially in medical. So
Right.
my message is to pay attention and to not go back, and to also just follow your intuition, follow your heart and your being, to be who you can be, to be all
Yeah.
you can be, as the saying goes, and to take care of each other. It's a rough game out there, and it seems to be under challenge right now. So we need to be vigilant from whichever viewpoint you come from at it. But remember, those are real people that will be hurt if we don't care for each other.
Yeah. I couldn't agree more. What a message to leave us with. I just want to tell everybody out there, wherever you get your streams, search 5B. You'll see Harry and Friends talking about the first aid ward that was opened up and the experience at that time. So can't wait for everybody to see that. Some random picture showing up there, and to search for Last Men Standing. That's where you want to check out. You can actually see that Last Men Standing by searching on the internet, and you'll see Harry's name associated with that, and you can tackle that. So, Harry, thank you so much for being on today. You've been wonderful. This is an amazing story that you've been through, and I love learning more about your experiences and your advocacy out there, and can't wait to watch the film. So thanks, Harry. Have a great day.
Thank you. Thanks, Erin.